Are we ready? Can you hear me? This question is for Dolores or Julie.
Julia?
We just got through with 2 hours. Didn't you get them all last in 2 hours?
I think so.
Okay. I was hoping they'd focus on the other speakers, but go ahead.
I would like to know what actually happened to the Essenes. I read your book about the Essenes, but I've read it twice, and I can't find what happened to all of them. I've read other things, but I thought maybe you had some updated information on it.
Oh, you know, they were all murdered. You didn't know that?
No, I didn't.
The Romans killed them all.
No.
It was in my
Blurts it
book
right
is
out.
when they were at Qumran, and they had the secret organizations that's why they hid by the Dead Sea, so people wouldn't bother them. But later, when the Romans came in, the same way they wanted their information, they couldn't get it. So they eventually went and hid. I'm trying to think where it was. It's another place. It wasn't in Qumran, where they were in this fortress. And they they tried to kill them all, and many of them committed suicide because there was no way out. So they eventually they said they were all destroyed. A lot of them probably escaped because a lot of the secret mystery schools were continued.
Well, Sudi
It's in the
had
history
mentioned-
books if you look.
Right, Sudi had mentioned in your book that they had a secret weapon that they could protect themselves with. So,
No. Well, they had a secret weapon, not a weapon. They used their minds to keep people from coming to Qumran. But when all this happened with the invasions, that's whenever Jerusalem fell, and they destroyed the temple of Jerusalem all at the same time. They overtook all of that area. By that time, they had to get out of there.
Robert is and Guy is. I thought that was you.
A lot of this
I
is
wish
in
I
my
was.
books,
I'm trying
too.
to worm my way in, but I think it's too late.
Hi, I have a question for Annie Stillwater Gray. Actually, I have two questions, please. The first one is if you could tell me what's the difference between your relationship with your spirit guide now as to when you first met him, how has it grown or changed? And the second part of that question is you say that you're married and you have relations with him. So can you explain the difference between spirit relation in the physical realm, like sex, and relations with your husband?
Yeah, everybody wants to know about the sex. It's all right.
Really?
I can talk about it.
Plug my ears.
Well, of course, obviously, my relationship with my life guide, Darcy, has grown. I mean, 2.5 years in, we were married, and as any marriage, it continues to grow and evolve. It was a little bit problematic because, he's in a spirit body and I'm in a human body, but on the other hand, he kept telling me, well, be glad you're in a human body. It's going to be easier, because one of us is. It's really funny because when Dolores called me to say she wanted to publish the book, she said, well, we usually don't publish books with so much sex in them, but she also said, it's all right because I understand why it has to be there. Because the guides have to learn everything they can to help you, and of course sex is a part of everyone's lives, so that they had to deal with everything from brutal rape to the most blissful unions. I have as you know, I have a human husband as well, and we have just normal sexual relations with Darcy. He tends to bring his energy within me, and I can only say that it's very blissful.
Okay, this question is for Sherry Wild and Dolores.
Where is she? Where is she?
Do you feel that we will see the U.S. government allow UFO disclosure anytime soon? And what do you think, in your opinion, is preventing that disclosure right now? I'll answer while Dolores gets situated. So the reason that we're not having disclosure and the reason that we're not interacting with the ETs is because the controllers of the planet actually don't really want us to have interaction with the ETs. Our fear, they're keeping us in fear, and we're being programmed always to be in fear of the ETs. And so that's my role, is to try to diminish the fear. That's the role of a lot of the volunteers and a lot of us that are in awareness, is to try to let people know that there's nothing to be afraid of. It's such a made-up story, this whole fear thing. So if you can imagine what it would be like if we did have open contact with our galactic family. They have a lot of gifts to give to us. We would be out from under the enslavement that's so prevalent on the planet. We would have free energy. We would have, everything would change. We would not be tied to our jobs. We would not be distracted. We would be able to live the truth of who we are. And that's the gift that they bring to us, that freedom. And those who are in control of the planet do not want that. And as long as we buy into it, as long as we allow ourselves to be in fear, we're playing the game right along with them, and we're allowing them to control us. You can't be a victim. It's not possible, but you can certainly play the part of one. And that's what we're doing by allowing ourselves to be victimized and held down. So it's up to us. They're not going to come and save us. I'm not trying to imply that we will be saved. That's not what's going on, but they are willing to share with us once we're to the level where we can. And we have to be vibrationally, we have to raise our vibration. We're not ready yet for it. We're still too low. And also, they're afraid of us as much as they're afraid of us. When they try to come in too much, you know that our government tries to shoot them down. And other governments also, but our government is the worst. And so, when they come into this density, they are coming down, stepping down into form, into physicality, and so they are physical, and so they can be harmed. So that's my answer on it. I don't know if Dolores has anything more to add.
Oh, the only thing I wanted to add, I'm sorry I can't understand so far away because the sound is just all over the place. I hope I'm not repeating what Sherry said. But those of you who were at the UFO conference heard Nick Pope speak. We had him, and he was talking about the disclosure that's happening in the UK, where they are releasing all their records and their files. So it's happening. It is happening. It's happening in China. It's happening in in Canada, especially, is releasing all of their UFO files. The United States is one of the very few that are not letting their records out yet. But the rest of the world is letting everyone know what they have. Okay.
Questions?
Thank you so much for helping all of us understand a little bit better what we've been. Question is for 3 or 4 people in this panel. In the United States and all over the world, not to mention anything to do with the wars that we are living through, so many accidents, like we have had children being killed in the hospital or in a school. We are seeing so many shootings. And someone would say, well, they're trying to clean the planet. Others will say, well, they made a pact, they had to go. Just happened with that plane. Exactly what is happening, or what are we doing, or what we should do as a group to help everyone. Thank you.
Who did she direct that at?
Yeah, it's to the panel. Who'd like to answer?
About all of the things that happened, school shootings, and all of the past.
One thing I could lead off with here to answer that question is that when we are aligned with our inner self, we will always be able to find a safe place. So no matter what is going on around the world, I talk to people frequently, and there is this tendency to go into fear. And people say, well, there are so many things going on. You know, how can you not be afraid? But when we quiet our mind down, and it really requires that ability to still your mind through things like learning how to meditate and those practices that we do. The reason why we do that is because it helps us to calm our emotions and calm our mind when we start getting around that fear energy, or we start going there ourselves. And then when we can connect to that, we can always find a safe place to be. So it isn't that always the children that are involved in these shootings and things like that, that there was anything that they did to be in that situation. In some ways, it's almost something that they didn't do, which is, perhaps they were allowing their conscious mind to be noisy so that it was kind of blocking out that inner guidance. And so maybe they didn't receive the word, to watch out for, what was coming. There's all these cases, like with the Twin Towers, of people who received different signals not to go in that day. And so, all these stories came back of why people were not there that day. And again, it's not saying anything against the people that were there. It's just that there's so many things going on that distract us. We have all of this technology that is constantly going after our attention. We have televisions and advertisements. And I don't know if you've noticed when you walk down the grocery store now, that as you walk down the aisle, there are these advertisements that reach out and almost grab you that you're walking by, and they're motion sensors. And so all of a sudden there's music going off, and these things start whirling, and so there's always these things reaching to grab our attention. But when we can learn how to stay focused and keep ourselves centered, then we'll always be able to find a safe place. So there's no reason really to fear all these things going on. Oh, yes.
I think also we have to remember that the situations that are happening are symptomatic of the systems that we're involved in. So if you look at massacres of children in school, I mean, the answer is quite simple. You take the guns away. You take away the weapons. You create a situation where these people don't have the availability of this to allow these things to happen. Obviously, each situation anyone's involved in is an agreement that they've made. But regardless of that, I think we have to remember that we put up too much with the fact that, these things are available, so easily available. I mean, I come from a country where, in my country, the police don't carry weapons. So the only thing they might have is a baton on the side of them. And, you come to America where, it's almost everyone's armed, basically. And so collectively, that's creating fear. So people are afraid to have the weapons, but people are afraid not to have the weapons. So where do you find the balance of it? And of course you have people generation after generation being educated to believe that, this is what's happening. And also the availability of these things on social media and the internet, how easy it is to make a bomb or a gun or all that sort of stuff. You take all that away, but I think it comes down to, what you were saying before about governments wanting to control through fear. So therefore, creating conflict is a way of actually having fear all the time. So we have generation after generation after generation being educated into being afraid of each other, afraid of what we see, afraid of what we have. So fear becomes second nature until eventually fear becomes first nature. And then that's where it becomes destructive. So.
I would like to...
Can I just...
Yeah, go ahead.
This is important.
Mm-hmm.
There's a completely alternative viewpoint on this, and that's a higher viewpoint.
Yeah.
What happens when these atrocities are broadcast? Not just fear, what happens? Everybody gets together with a single thought process. Everybody abhors it. Nobody in the general populace is in agreement with it. They all go against it. They all focus on it and say, this is wrong. We shouldn't be doing this. This is not what a civilized community do to each other. And so it provides a vehicle for changing our thought process and changing what we find as being acceptable in small chunks to become unacceptable when it's in large chunks. And so we focus on it in a different way. You look at what happens in wars. Look at what Hitler did. He provided a worldwide focus on the need to change the way we work. Yeah? This happens all the time. It's not just specifically with certain environments, but it's all to do with giving us a wake-up call, making us think and work together for a positive way and not a negative way. And so these individuals, these souls, who are either the assassinator or those who are assassinated, work together energetically to provide a focus for the general populace, the wider populace, to start to think in a more positive way and not accept the small negative ways that gradually eat away at us. And that's a different way of looking at it.
Well, that's what I basically was going to say along the same lines as what Guy is saying, is that it has to be viewed from a higher perspective. It's true that we are being kept, or at least they're trying to keep us in fear in order to perpetuate the system that's already in place to keep us from evolving and awakening. But you can't have that victim mentality. We can't be victims unless we agree to it. And just like these children are not victims. So you look at it from a higher perspective, and what it really is energy. We are all energy. The universe is energy in motion. And so if you look at it that way, and that we're all just holograms, because that's the truth of it, we're all really in the mind of God. We're just an idea, a thought and we're just playing out this energy. So if you look at it from that perspective, it's hard sometimes to take that out of look at children and go, well, that's just an idea. But the truth of it is those are souls that agreed to play that role in order to be a catalyst for the rest of us. It isn't that they sacrifice themselves. It's not seen that way at all. There's no sacrifice involved. It's just we're an evolving species, and we are birthing a new planet, and that's part of what needs to be looked at. So all of these things that are happening are being put in front of us so that we can heal it, so that we can look at it and heal it. Just what everybody was saying. You look at it and you say, we're not going to allow for this anymore. There's enough of this stupidity in this world. And so that's why all of that is happening. There seems to be more violence. Well, it's because we need to look at it. And we need to make up our minds we're not going to have this in our new earth. And our response to it has to be one, though, of love and forgiveness without judgment. And that's the part that's hard. We have to forgive and forgive and forgive, not in a judgmental way. But we're only going to get to the higher frequencies through our heart. And so when you look at a situation like that, you love the children, but you also love the person who's playing the other side of the role. And we have to forgive and allow and understand that we chose to be in a world of duality. And if you're going to live in a world of duality, you're going to have the supposed good and evil. There's no judgment on who plays which role, the evil or the good. It's both sides of the same coin. And that's what the wake-up calls are about. Okay? That's just my 2 cents worth. Okay.
I just wanted to add that also from an ancestral and a genetic standpoint, helping people recover from the grief and loss as a result of the collective consciousness. There's a lot of cultures that are still in that horrific trauma grief cycle, American Indian, the Jewish community, and so forth. And when they can resolve it at a genetic level, on a physical level, then they can go into these higher spots that each person has talked about already. They can arise above it because the energy isn't as dense, and they can release it from a physical standpoint, and they can evolve as a result of that too. So it's easy to say when we look at it from a higher perspective, but when you're in the physical body and you're looking at all the trauma out there, it's hard to get there unless you can release it at an energetic level. And the only way you can do that is go in and release it at an energetic level.
Oh, can you hear me? Oh.
So everybody's got a thought on this one. I want to pick up on two things. One that Patrick said and then Sherry said. We can talk a lot about all the things that are happening there. I have two microphones now. So we can spend a lot of time talking about all the things that are out there and all the things that are happening, and that's all true, or at least true on this level. Adding to something Sherry said and what Patrick was saying is we really can take on the hard work of seeing no evil. We really can commit to elevating our perspective and looking past and through the perception of evil, of violence, not just to forgive, but to ultimately find inherent innocence in everything. For me, that's where the big game is played. The way it's often said is, and by the way, we can practice this, and the best way we can practice it is each of us can take the most abhorrent situation that we find the most unacceptable, and we can do our work on it. It's easy to forgive my friend Annie here, assuming she needs forgiving. It's not so hard to find a way to reconcile pedophiles, mass murderers, carnage, school shootings. And yet that's the place where I can break my heart wide open and find a space that I cannot find any other way. And it's heartbreakingly difficult. But that changes the vibration in ways that I've not found any other approach will succeed with. So it's additive to everything I've heard, and the thing I like about it is it begins with me. I can do that. I can make my contribution to it. So pretty cool, pretty challenging.
One thing I wanted to add is metaphysically speaking, the outer is always a reflection of the inner. So if people did not have evil thoughts inside or negative thoughts, we would not see violence in the outer world. So trying to change it out here is like, looking in the mirror and trying to wash the mirror when you don't like what you see. So we could say, oh, terrorism, that's terrible, but how do we terrorize ourselves? By looking in the mirror and saying, oh, I hate myself, I look ugly today, oh, I'm afraid of getting old. All those are terrorizing thoughts. We terrorize ourselves, and hence we see terrorism in the world. We might look at the young school children and see this innocent 8-year-old and think, oh, how terrible. We don't know what kind of thoughts that child was having. Maybe they had violent thoughts in their own mind or thoughts that they didn't like themselves, and hence we see the outer manifestation of a collective inner thoughts of violence and so forth.
As perhaps the only member of the panel with a concealed weapons permit, I disagree that I disagree that we should get rid of all the weapons. There are so many other problems that we can focus on, such as, like Ken said, the pedophiles and abusers of other individuals. Those are things that we need to work on, as opposed to just taking away everybody's guns, because if you take away everybody's guns, well, let's look at Switzerland. By law, everyone there has a gun, and they know how to use it, how to clean it, and they have to serve in the armed forces. There's a feeling of inclusion that perhaps that maybe we're lacking here, that we don't have everybody as part of our great big family, that the compassion for them doesn't exist, that we haven't included them into the benefits of our society. I'm not saying we should become communists, but I'm saying that perhaps we should reach out more to our neighbors and to other folks and let them know that we have a sense of love and caring for everyone, and that they're our fellow human beings.
This is for Sherry. I read in your book, and it regards time.
Could you speak in the mic? I can hardly.
I read in your book regarding time. There was a time in your life where the ETs wanted to show you that time doesn't really exist the way we think it does.
Right.
And I was wondering why then so many, and they were able to manipulate it. And so I wondered why so many abductees experience missing time. Why are they not able to manipulate that so that the abductee does not experience the missing time?
They do. They do. That's a really good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that, but that's a really interesting thing I looked at not too long ago myself, because when I started to realize how much involvement I had with them, and it opened up to, and I'm still remembering, and as the layers are peeling away, I'm like, oh my Lord, I've been with them so much, and I'm actually more there than here. But it's not always a physical thing. But let's talk about just the physical. So when I'm with them physically, I'm not aware of the lost time usually, unless I happen to look at a clock, or unless I notice the sun is in a different place or it's gotten dark. So they're able to do that very smoothly, and like the roadside abduction, for instance, when they picked me up when I was 17, the only reason I knew about the time change, as far as I was concerned, you know, my car had stalled. I didn't know anything else until I walked into my girlfriend's house and saw the clock 2 hours later, straight up noon. So if you don't have a clock around, you don't know. I would have, if it weren't for that clock and the fact that I was supposed to be there at a certain time, I wouldn't have known. One of in the book is the birthday party experience. That was totally seamless. I'm standing there, and then the next second, and that's pretty typical. There's not very many, there's no loss at all. So for me, there's no loss of time, okay? But for people around me, and that's what the investigators were able to track, there were documentations of my being gone and missing for hours, and nobody could find me on all these different occasions. So, but for me, it was interesting, how could I live a life on this planet and be human and still spend so much time with them? And that's where I got the answer came, that there is no time. So I'm with them for sometimes days, you know, but I'm only gone here for an hour and a half or something in the middle of the night or during the day or something. But because there is no time, I'm in timelessness when I'm with them. Unless I'm on the ship, unless I'm on the scout ship on the ground, and even there it's a little bit distorted. But when they take me up into the recon ships, the bigger ships, I can be up there and I can have, it seems like days up there with them. And down here, it's an hour. It's because of the difference in the time. It's a dimensional thing. The time doesn't exist up in that dimension. It's timelessness. So does that kind of answer? It's a fascinating subject, and we're all able to manipulate time. I've been able to do it. You can pull it back or you can push it out, and it's fun to play with. You can do it. Everyone can do that. So, yeah.
Questions?
Thank you. Based on the same subject, time, I don't know who to ask, Sherry, whether you would or not, but if time is, why are we able to build up archaeological things from eons back if there is no time?
I know.
That's what's hard for me to understand.
I know. I have a good friend who, she's an archaeologist, and she has the hardest time with the idea of there not being time. It's in this dimension, time is linear. And so in this dimension, we buy into the idea that there is a past and there is a future. There is really, in truth, only the eternal now. And that now moment expands and is just is. So it's a very hard thing to try to explain time and how it doesn't exist to an archaeologist who says, you know, and holds this up. All I can say is that in this world, time is part of the system that you have in play here, and we buy into it, and because we buy into it, that's what we have. But it isn't that there isn't time. How to put that? When you're, like, for instance, if you're on the ship and you do work when you're on the ship, so you are living a life. It isn't that you're just nothing, that you're in a void. You are living a life and there's things going on, but you're not tracking with time. You just are present with whatever it is that you're doing, and you're not in awareness of any specific kind of a time dimension. It's a different kind of, it's just a now moment. If you practice presence and you're in the now moment, you have that sense of being just in that space, and there is nothing in front of you and nothing behind you.
Well, if you say we buy into it, if a child was born theoretically in the forest with no parents to raise it, nobody to mention time, would he or she still, you know, have a sense of time? I mean, when he goes back to what he did yesterday, that thing's going to still be there.
In this dimension, yeah, child born, it remind me of my dad. My dad always used to, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there.
Well, yeah, maybe that's.
But if you're born in this dimension, the third and fourth dimensions are dimensions of time. Fifth dimension is somewhat time. Sixth, there is no time. So the higher you go into the dimensions. So in this dimension, time is a part of the reality in this dimension.
I understand that. Thank you.
Yeah, can I help out just a little bit there? One of the things that I experienced within my first contacts with the entities I was communicating with was the description for what actually happens to us, that time does not exist at all. What we do, we exist in something called event space. Now, Shelley just touched on being in space, this continuous space that everything happens continuously. And I was told to call it event space. We exist in a series of events. But these events aren't linear. They're happening concurrently. All at the same, shall I say, time.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that I was told to explain it was like a rubber band ball. Okay? Rubber band ball, right? Each rubber band, if you think of it, is the same as a space, an event space, that we've experienced something, and there's myriad event spaces all collectively working together right now. And that each event space is in contact with each other event space, either directly or indirectly through the contact of other event spaces, just like a rubber band ball. Each rubber band is in contact with each other rubber band, either directly or indirectly. And that allows us to move from one event space to another event space, because everything's happening concurrently. Think of it in those sort of ways. It's difficult for the human mind to understand and express it, but everything is happening in pockets of events. Not time, events. Mm-hmm. That's how I had it described to me.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to describe. It's
Yeah,
very hard.
yeah.
Once you get it in your head, you can hold it for a while, the idea of it, but it's really hard to explain to someone else.
So we can travel on another rubber band back to the archaeological date, back in 5,000 BC.
Yeah, and the entities that we sometimes have the fortune of meeting with know how to work with this. They know how to slip from one event space to another event space. Yeah, they do it by using the frequencies and the dimensions. They can work with it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, sure.
You did a wonderful job of explaining, because it is a very complicated concept. The ETs have said mankind is probably the only species in the universe has found a way to measure something that does not exist. And I used to ask them in the sessions, how can everything be happening at the same time? We know we're a baby, we grow to be a child, a teenager. How can that all be happening at the same time? They said, that's because you're using the wrong word. It's not happening at the same time, it's existing at the same time. So that baby is still there, the teenager is still there, the other one in the past life is still there. So these archaeological things, that pyramid, for instance, that had the golden cap in those days, it's still there. And each level, as it deteriorates, is always existing. We're focusing on what we know now. But if we had the ability, we could see the other levels. I guess it's a level. Wouldn't that be a way to describe it then?
I would think it's difficult.
They talked about
yeah.
it like
Yeah.
transparencies,
Yeah.
overlays,
Yes,
transparencies.
There's another way of looking at it, but it involves an engineering term. When we use computer-aided designs, we create motor cars or planes or houses or buildings, we create levels or layers of detail. But each of those levels of layers of detail interface with each other because they create the whole. If you stripped away all of the detail with a motor car and you just had the wheels and tyres there, you just have the wheels and tyres in that computer-aided design space. when you flick a few switches and you get the rest of the car in there, the wiring harness, the body in white, the trim and hardware, the engine, it all appears in the same space. So it's almost like levels within the same space that exist concurrently. The rubber bands, for instance.
Yeah. We could see it if we were more involved. We could look back. Some of them in the sessions have said, I see the pyramid, for instance, the way it used to be. Like they're looking at it from a different perspective. So it's all there, but you're getting into the deep, deep end of the pool. Okay. Okay.
Thank you. I have a question here, but it doesn't deal with time so much. I was just curious if anyone had any insight as to what happened to that airplane that went down. I would like to know.
Shall I give you the boring answer? I've been asked this question a lot since March, since it's happened.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And basically, the information I picked up is that it actually went through some clear air turbulence and just dropped out the sky. And what happened is when it was moving, it was turning. When it went into clear air turbulence, there is no lift. There's nothing for the plane to use as a lifting air service, so it just dropped, because it was in a stall anyway. So it went into this clear air turbulence and just dropped. And it's just gone. So rather than being something like it went through a different frequential state or dimensional portal, it's just dropped. And the problem is, the authorities are looking for something in completely the wrong place. It's like me trying to find a needle that I've lost in my garden, in your garden, and it's just not there. There was a couple of guys who were trying to explain that the whole plane had been abducted and been taken to inner Earth, but this was a natural disaster that just at the moment hasn't been found. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Very boring, unfortunately.
Well, in my sessions, we asked the same question, and in the reunion on the first night, they had 3 people on stage and asked that question, and it's always the same answer. It's more or less, it is too complicated to explain, but it's more or less like it went into another dimension. But they kept saying, and even the ones I've done, the people are safe. But that can mean a lot of things. Because when you die and go to the spirit side, you're also safe. So I want to know where were they? And they said they couldn't explain it in a way we can understand, but it's similar to going into another dimension. And it's to make people think. Well, we're really thinking about it. It's not going to be found. Okay.
Hi, my question's for Guy. As you recognize, we've been through your level 1, 2, and 3 classes, and they made a big difference in our life. I was noticing that all the speakers that had classes mentioned their classes and what time and date that they would be having them. Will you be having classes this year? And if so, are they full? When are you having them, if you're having them?
Well, every hands up who's got a workshop today. Yeah, we've got workshops. Yeah, my own particular workshops are on Monday and Tuesday, and they start at 9 o'clock and finish around 5. And there's plenty of space there. So if people want to work with the technique I developed to be able to project your consciousness into the different universal environments that have been created as a result of the multiversal structure, then you can do so. Anybody can do it. It's not limited to special people. We can take anybody off the street and they can learn the technique and they can do it. So if people want to learn how to project your consciousness into the different universal states that I've been able to do and create the books I've written, then it's there on Monday. Yeah, thank you for asking.
I work with agriculture, producing vegetables in a natural way. That means looking forward to get myself out of the way and allow natural forces to work with, to do it themselves. So for those who are getting information from the other side, I would like very much to get feedback about how to do that better, how to allow natural forces to work to produce plants and get this healthy food that is been talking about eating live food and good food for ourselves to grow spiritually. I can ask about sex relations too, if you prefer.
I've got no experience of that. Yeah, I mean, healthy foods. Yeah. There's very quickly, there's clearly, when we look at individuals who are able to project their consciousness into different dimensions, or do astral traveling, or do transcendental meditation, there's one thing which is common amongst them all, and that is that they are vegetarians. They don't eat meat, whether it's fish, lean meats, or heavy meats. And the reason for that is the vibrations associated with meat pull you down. You may leave this conference this weekend and be a higher frequency, but the moment you go and eat a McDonald's, it'll pull you down because the frequencies are lower associated with meat. If you eat foods that are vegetable, now clearly vegetables also have a level of consciousness, but they give themselves up for us, but willingly to be food. But their level of vibration is a higher state anyway, because there isn't the association with a soul of any sort, okay, in that specific genre of soul. And so if we eat things like raw foods or root vegetables, then we have a higher level of frequency associated with using those. And also, it's how we prepare them. If we eat raw foods, we gain the energy from those raw foods. If we cook them, we sometimes lose the energy because we're boiling them and we're removing some of the goodness and the nutrients and the minerals. But more importantly, we're changing their state of beingness from being what they were to something else. Because we apply heat, we change the quantum level of what they are. So really, we should be eating vegetables and not cooking them. But of course, that's sometimes impossible for us. But look at some of the other countries like India. They eat vegetables on a regular basis, raw vegetables on a regular basis. And the Japanese, they eat lots of sushi that's vegetables as well. So it's possible to do it. But from my perspective, there's a common thing with every advanced society who's able to work with the higher frequencies. And that is, they don't eat meat. Simple as that.
Well, I'm a big gardener. I've spent the last 30 years in Maine developing my gardens and my orchards. You asked how to do it better. There are two things. If you can grow anything, grow it, because there's a relationship between the seed that you plant and harvesting and eating the vegetable. We'll go with vegetables. And the other thing is that my spirit guide Darcy and I took on a project working with the elementals. So you want them to be welcome in your garden. That will help you with everything. I've been working with the elementals. I had so many pears. Last year I had to invite friends in to help me can them. So those are two ways that things can go better.
That's right, yeah.
Ask Blair if he has anything, because he's definitely trying to get himself out of the way.
All right, so my understanding of the question, you were actually asking about how to grow foods better. Is that correct? It's more about the gardening? Because I know, Guy, you were talking about more what to eat, but I just wanted to clarify the question.
My question is more about how to work with nature as to allow nature to do it instead of doing myself.
All right.
I want to
so
get
that's
out
what
of
I
the
thought
way.
I was understanding.
I
All
want
right,
natural forces to work and do it.
All right. Well, one thing that I would recommend, the first thing I would recommend is to look into Rudolf Steiner and biodynamic farming, because I've worked with some biodynamics, and Rudolf Steiner did a lot of research on gathering earth energies and natural forces and using those very productively with the land and with the crops. And so he worked with certain preparations that there are specific techniques, and you can find all those details. I don't have those right here. But you apply those to the entire land area in the beginning, but then it sets up a vibration within the land that you're using, and it can be hundreds of acres. It doesn't have to be just a small area. And then as that thought form becomes stronger in that area, then you get to a point where you just go around the perimeter just to reinforce that thought form and that energy. And so there's been several different organizations and communities that I've worked with and talked to that have used biodynamics. And from what I've seen, it does work. The second thing that I would recommend also is, a question came to my mind too, is how many people here have ever hugged a tree? I was expecting that. And it doesn't surprise me a bit. So when you hug a tree, I mean, trees are kind of more our size. It's hard to hug a flower. Although, many of you may have gone by and stroked a flower, like you're petting a cat or something. And so as we do those things where we work to connect with the plants, and this goes back to what you were talking about with the nature spirits and elementals, is really when we're working to connect with nature spirits and elementals, that's where we're working to connect with the essence of the plant. Because even though they're on a different consciousness level than what we're experiencing now, they're not going out and working and creating things. They're just, they are a perfect example of being in the now. Because animals have memory, and then we took that and then we added imagination. So we experience our consciousness in the past and we go into the future. But plants are just in the now. They don't think about what's happening tomorrow. They don't think about, what happened 3 weeks ago. They just know, oh, the sun's coming up. I'm just going to open up. Oh, it's going this way. I'm just going to track it. So they're just in the now. So, we talk a lot about being in the now, but that's why we like being in nature so much. That's why we feel at peace when we're walking through a forest. That's why we love to sit by a lake and just experience our toes in the grass, because the plants are in the now. So as you spend time connecting with the plants, ask them what they want, what they need. You'll get that guidance.
I just want to say one last thing. Raising your vibration. So, there's a lot of research out there about if you send loving thoughts to water, the vibration changes, the crystals of the water, and I'm not going to go into all that, but if you raise your vibration, you release the heavy vibrations that you may be holding. I'm not saying you are, but all of us are human still in this body. So when you work on your own vibrations and you send loving thoughts to the plants, they will respond in turn. The water that you feed them, all of that, it is about that interaction, and raising your vibrations will help with that.
And since I work in agriculture, and in the new world we won't be eating, you have any suggestions what I can do when I arrive there?
Actually, I'm going to stir the pot just a smidge. Not to be contrarian or anything, but I was thinking about that if there are 30,000 people around the world who aren't eating food at all, I think that's what I heard you say, yeah, okay, then maybe more. Then you probably really do need to wrestle with the idea about how you're perceiving food. You really have to wrestle with that idea. And I understand that given our orientation, we may think food is necessary. I get that. But if there are 30,000 people or more who are subsisting without food, living off whatever they're living off of, spiritual energy, then I'm going to add to what Sherry said. Maybe a big part of the issue is raising our consciousness. And I'd go so far as to say something that Joel Goldsmith said. He's the New Thought spiritualist who said, with the elevation of consciousness, materiality becomes an irrelevant conversation. that's provocative. And as a guy who eats too much, I'm really challenged by my own remarks.
But very quickly, though, I fast 3 days a week. There's 3 days a week I don't eat. And I don't miss the food, and I don't feel hungry. Yeah? No, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. But I can do concurrently every weekend if I need to. But I've found out you just don't miss the food. Yeah? It's easy. Disturbingly easy.
Do we have any more questions? Back here.
Comment for Blair. Appreciate your ideas on guns perhaps being less acceptable than they have been in the past. And perhaps in this particular country right now, many of us feel that guns are an extension of a fear phenomenon. They might not be elsewhere, but they are here now. And I highly suspect that as we move into higher levels, frequency levels, it's an inverse relationship between high frequencies and weaponry. And I just appreciated your comments on that. You don't have to say anything back at this time, perhaps, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just thinking that, the more we raise our consciousness, the more that we're able to see how much more there is available to us. And the more people who see what's available, then the less we have to see the negativity, the density. And so as we just pay attention to something different, then we understand how to change the reality of it. So sometimes it isn't necessarily always about what we actually have to do. It's about changing the way that we think, changing the way that we think about each other, of course, is where it all starts. And that's how we all start treating each other differently.
Thanks, Blair. I have one quick question for Sherry also. And you stated that it was in 2008, I believe November 9th, that we were given the choice to move on or not. What about the individuals who have been born since that time? Are they automatically moving on, so to speak, or is anybody else that they've come to the conference, they've been around high frequencies, they've had a change of heart, a change of frequency, a change of mind? Do they not have a choice? Does that preclude what might be possible for them?
Thanks for asking that question, because it gives me a chance to clarify, because the whole purpose of having that light reading session with every soul on the planet, and that includes those who are not in form at the time. So it was more of an opportunity for the soul to look at the situation and make a decision, and of course to register if they wanted to continue on. But of course there's always that opportunity. It's an ongoing process. This is a journey that we're taking, and we're all taking it. So it isn't like the door is going to slam shut necessarily, but there is in some ways a physical manifestation of what's happening to us on a soul level, our vibration going up. So it is in truth that the planet physically is going to reflect to us the third, fourth, and then fifth dimension. And so your soul, on a soul level, you make the decision, but the whole purpose of drawing attention to it is for that individual soul to sort of have a wake-up call. And as for the children coming onto the planet, yeah, they're all already there. That's why there's a lot of issues with the ADD and all that stuff, whatever it's called, ADT or whatever. But yeah, it isn't like it was a hard and fast, like there was a decision made that night, and it was to point out that this vibration is not going to be in tune at where you're at now. You're not going to, it doesn't look like you're going to make it. It was more like pointing that out and saying, so hopefully you can, and the higher self will poke, make the decision to knock a few people down so that they can have the opportunity to awaken, if that's the soul's decision. You see, that's the way I understood it to be. Yeah.
We had another question over here. Are there any more questions?
Well, I guess that's everything, and I want to thank the panel, and thanks everyone for coming. I really hope you enjoyed the conference.